Welcome back, everybody. This is United versus Everybody. I am your host, Sean, and we are back with episode 4 of What If. If you've been following along this new series, it's where I explore kind of an alternate timeline in Manchester United history where key events, whether that's transfers, match outcomes, what have you, what might have been had those moments had gone the other way. We've already discussed what might have happened if Jose Mourinho had taken over when Sir Alex retired instead of David Moyes. We've explored what would have happened maybe had United signed Ronaldinho in the summer of 2003 instead of a young Cristiano Ronaldo as well. That one just dropped. So we are back again with episode 4. Like I said, again, it's because there are times during these live streams, right, where we have these questions that pop up, or during my conversations, questions will pop up that they do just make me stop and wonder, what if things have been different? Again, that's why we're here to explore. So we're back today with episode 4 to explore what might have been had Sir Matt Busby not been able to convince a kid from Belfast to return to United. What if the lad's homesickness proved to be too much to bear? Um, what if George Best had returned home and never come back to Manchester United? That's what we're going to explore today. So, like the video, please subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss out on any of these fun videos. So, let's dive in, guys. Why don't we start first with how it came to be that George Best joined United? So he was spotted by a United scout named Bob Bishop back when he was just 15 years old, playing in local Irish teams, youth academy teams, and stuff, and doing his thing basically. But Bishop was so impressed with this young, precocious little teenager that he actually went and sent a telegram. For those of you who don't know what a telegram is, it's like email, but on paper form. For those of you who don't know what email is, it's like text, but on a computer and not a phone. But Bishop sent the telegram to then Manchester United manager Sir Matt Busby. And what all the telegram said was, I think I found you a genius. Best and another youngster named Eric McMorty. So I'm going to throw a picture up here. They were given a trial at Manchester United. So what this entailed, though, again, this is before all the fancy transportation. They had to take a ferry. They had to go from Ireland to a ferry to get not to Manchester, but to like Liverpool. And so they were pretty much on their own when they got to Liverpool off that ferry, with very vague instructions to simply hop a train, as the club really hadn't sent anyone to meet them, something that we did not improve upon for many years, in fact. Um, and so the two kids away from home for the first time, right? I bet that wasn't scary for them at all at like 15 years old. They managed to get hold of a taxi, but again, being out of towners, right? Two young kids had no clue where they were at, what they were doing, where they were supposed to be. Really, all they knew is they needed to go to Old Trafford, so that's where they asked to be taken. They didn't realize though that football season was done. Old Trafford also had a cricket team which was currently in the middle of its season. And so that's where they ended up being taken mistakenly. Thankfully, they eventually found their way to the club. But by that point, young George Best was already sort of feeling a bit anxious, a bit down, a bit stressful, a bit anxious, like I said. And this is, I mean, and you might not understand that, despite, his persona later on in his career, but he was actually a very shy, very introverted kid, especially. I mean, even into his adulthood, he wasn't like, despite the way he behaved, he's a very introverted young man. But homesickness had already set in for both McMorty and George Best. After less than a few days of being at the club, they returned home back to Belfast. Sir Matt Busby, though, was determined not to lose such a promising young player, and he did everything he could to get George Best back at United. He sent scouts to Best's parents' house, try to convince him to return, and Sir Matt eventually phoned George Best's parents himself. He promised George Best's parents that he would take care of the kid. And he convinced George himself to return back to the club, and probably apologize for just the way things went down. But he convinced him to return. Now, considering everything that George Best went on to accomplish at United, no United fan really wants to think about a universe where without Georgie as a United player, right? We don't want to think about that. Some of the best songs are that. We've got the Trinity statue, everything. We don't want to think about a timeline where he returned to Belfast and had a career maybe in the Irish leagues. No offense, of course, but let's say it's no United, right? He was discovered playing in those leagues, so it's probably likely that had he not come back to United, he would have probably spent the majority of his career there, maybe going on to Scottish League or something, perhaps. Problem is, again, the Irish leagues, Scottish leagues, they're not competitive as English football at that time, so it's unlikely that George Best would have reached his full potential without that proper challenge, without some of the biggest stages you can imagine, really putting the spotlight on him and allowing him to really just do what he does best. There's a chance that maybe he could have joined another English club, maybe, but again, the kicker here was Sir Matt Busby's personal care and his personal guarantee and his personal touch in reaching out himself, which George wouldn't have had at any other club. His play style, George Best, probably would have suited maybe Spain or Italy at the time, but again, that would have had to happen later in his career after he matured a bit, given that homesickness, right? We're predicating this on the homesickness that kept him from joining United, and it would have been a big step for him at that age to go someplace like Italy or Spain, right, when he didn't even speak those languages. So all of this would have been dependent on him overcoming those homesickness, but also later on in his career, this all would have depended on him overcoming some of those vices that he had and a lot of that off-pitch behavior that he was notorious for. Without Sir Matt Busby to kind of temper that side of George Best for as long as he could, right? Who's to say if George's career would have been as long as it was? If he hadn't been convinced to return to Manchester United, for instance, I mean, there's no doubt that George Best would have been a great player. But would he have been as great of a player as he was? I'd like to think no. Would he have won 2 first division titles? It's hard to say. Would he have won a European Cup? I doubt it. Would he have won a Ballon d'Or? Probably not. Would he have won Footballer of the Year? Would he have been an inaugural inductee to the English Football Hall of Fame? Probably not. Would he have gotten a BBC Lifetime Achievement Award? Probably not. Would he be a FIFA 100 member? Probably not. Would he have been finished in the top 20 and the top 5 FIFA Player of the Century voting? I doubt it, right? And most importantly, fans would have never had the opportunity to watch George dazzle and leave footprints of stardust everywhere he stepped while he was on the pitch. I've watched that 68 final several times, and I still can't believe the skill of George Best watching that, right? I've watched, I mean, the 07, 08 Ronaldo, or maybe like prime Lionel Messi, probably are the closest I've seen anybody come to replicating that. But again, even then, the gap is still huge. Like the level is still way above. Like if you go watch George Best, there's nothing like watching George Best. The guy was just magical, blessed by God when it came to ability on a football pitch. Again, go watch those old games and go watch some of those old highlights. You'll shed a tear. He was that like magnificent to watch play. Without George Best too, we wouldn't have been able to hand Portuguese giants Benfica, who were one of the biggest teams in football at the time, we wouldn't have been able to handle their first ever home defeat in a European Cup in 1966. Here, it was in that game that George Best scored twice in the first 13 minutes, I think, that went on to push United to win that game 5-1. And what this also means, if Sir Matt hadn't been able to convince George Best to return to United, this would have meant that we would have never gotten a Trinity. There would have been no Trinity. And I don't just mean the statue. George Best was the final piece of the rebuild. Best, Charlton, and Law worked so well together. It was like they were made for it. They first played together in a 4-1 victory over West Brom. That was back in 1966. And no, sorry, 64. Sorry, I apologize. I got my dates mixed up. January 1964, and each of them scored in that win. It was a 4-1 victory, and each of them scored. Between them, in fact, George Best, Dennis Law, and Bobby Charlton made a grand total of 1,632 appearances and 665 goals for United. Unfortunately, George Best is also used among academies as a warning sign for young footballers. His priorities and his off-pitch lifestyle arguably shortened his career at the top level and ultimately led to his premature death from liver failure. But if there's one regret that I'll ever have as a United supporter, it's that I never had the opportunity to watch George Best play in person. And to think there's a whole blessed generation of fans who came very, very close to not having that opportunity themselves. So thank God for Matt Busby, right? But that is how I think things would have gone had Sir Matt Busby not been able to convince a very young, very homesick George Best to return to United. We would have missed out, obviously. I think George Best's career would have not ultimately gone on to reach the heights that it did. And I think football in general would have really missed out on something very, very glorious to watch. So let me know what you thought on that. Please like the video. Please leave a comment. Please subscribe if you're new. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys for checking out episode 4 of What If. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys on the next one. Later.